I'm Jana Wong Healy, and I've been a film industry professional for years, having worked in development, production, and distribution for a variety of film studios and companies. I currently teach business communication at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business. I'm here with Stephen Gundel, a professor of film and television studies at the University of Warwick in the UK. His background is in history and politics, which he taught at Cambridge, Oxford, and London universities. So let's get started. Stephen, the term blockbuster is much used these days, especially during the summer months, but let's get back to basics. Tell us what a blockbuster is.
What is a blockbuster? Well, the term itself is quite a curious one, and I think it derives from World War II aerial bombing. The idea that you would have a bomb that would land and that would destroy a whole block. And that term seems to have been applied, first of all, in the 1940s to a number of big films. It seems to have been retrospectively applied to some films that we'd certainly recognize today as, big epics like Birth of a Nation, 1915, or Gone with the Wind. But it was taken up principally in the 1970s as a term to describe films which were big budget, big entertainment, were surrounded by an extraordinarily powerful, all-eclipsing, one might say, advertising campaign with merchandising and so on. These were films that were designed really to sort of land like a bomb on the market. You couldn't ignore them. They were going to destroy the competition and suck people in, make people talk about them. They were massive events. And I think those films are still with us, of course, although the term blockbuster isn't applied quite as frequently as it used to be. But the blockbuster includes all sorts of different genres. I mean, disaster movies, for example, are often blockbusters. But Jaws is often cited as the first one. So stars are often not very prominent in blockbusters. They can be, but you often have quite large casts. Cameo appearances are frequent. Special effects, production values right in the foreground. These are the sort of qualities that sort of mark a blockbuster.
I remember in Los Angeles when Jaws came out, lines and lines of people around the block. And I always thought that that's where the term blockbuster came from, because at those times the theaters were very shrewd about making sure that nobody could go into the theater until everybody could see everybody else lining up around them.
Yeah.
Now you don't have that because you can reserve seats at some of the higher end theaters, and so they lose that little bit of showmanship.
Well, I think you're right. I have heard that explanation. And of course, apart from the different sort of practice of the way you buy tickets and enter movie theaters, it's also great publicity for a film to have lines of people, going around the block. It shows that, this is an event, people want to see it. So anybody seeing the line is going to say, oh, well, what's going on? I must join in with that collective event as well. So that is also sometimes sort of used as the explanation for the origin of the term.
But it goes all the way back to World War II. Very interesting. So is there any difference between an epic film and one that's colossal, one with a cast of large characters or one with just a giant mechanical shark?
Well, I don't know. I think blockbuster, it's a bit of an umbrella term, really. And when we talk about epics, we sometimes think of maybe the sort of films that Dino made when he was moving beyond those relatively low budget Italian films. Things like, War and Peace, 1956, or The Bible in the Beginning, 10 years later, 1966. I mean, these are epics, if you like. War and Peace are, one of the most important novels of the 19th century. the Bible, clearly, the most important book in Western civilization. So in a way, these are epic stories which people know and which are, there to be borrowed or adapted for film. So, you can have, relatively modest, low budget epics, but they're rare. I mean, normally, these epic things, they call for a big budget. They call for an investment of funds because you've already got something which, if it's sold properly, will reach a mass audience because, the titles are so well known. You say the Bible or War and Peace, people know these titles. They don't need to be persuaded, with a big shark or something, because nobody had heard of Jaws before the film.
I love
There's a novel, Peter Benchley's novel, of course, but, it's nothing like, doesn't compare with the Bible. So,
well, we mentioned at the beginning that Dino produced a whole host of movies on very tight shoestring budgets. So why do you think he decided to jump into the blockbuster genre, or why do you think he wanted even to be associated with blockbusters?
well, that's interesting, isn't it? And I think if we take the first one, and that is War and Peace, which was made in Italy, but in conjunction with Paramount, in 1955, 56, with a very international cast. Audrey Hepburn in the role of Natasha, Anita Ekberg is in there, Mel Ferrer, Henry Fonda as Pierre, Herbert Lom plays Napoleon. So a very international cast. I mean, not many Italians there, in fact, even though it was filmed in Italy. I think what this tells us is that Dino was determined after his initial Italian successes to reach an international market. And he was always convinced that in order to reach that market, you had to have an English-speaking cast, that subtitled films could only go so far. They could win prestigious awards, Oscars, and so on, but they were never going to get into mainstream movie theaters in the United States, for example, and maybe not even, in Britain. So it was an attempt, I think, to reach that market, to use Italian expertise, which is quite interesting. If you look at Dino's blockbusters, even those made in the United States, he's often got Italian costume designers, Italian cinematographers, providing the competence, because I think large scale films require safe hands. You would never put an untried director or an untried cinematographer in charge of a blockbuster in the way that you might with a small budget film. Art house movies, for example, you can give it to a director who's made one or two films, maybe even making his debut, but you would never do that with a blockbuster. So, for example, War and Peace is directed by King Vidor, had been making films since the 20s. So and if you look at the list of them, I mean, the Bible, it's John Huston, Barabbas, it's Richard Fleischer, Ulysses even, which might be seen as a sort of prototype blockbuster, 1954, which was the first Italian film to employ a Hollywood actor in the male lead role, and that was Kirk Douglas. That's, if you like, the prototype, the precursor of Dino's blockbusters. I mean, well, it was Mario Camerini, an Italian director who was very popular in the 1930s, somebody who, knew his trade incredibly well.
I remember Dino's first blockbuster as being King Kong. Now, there was something really special about the way that movie was sold. And I remember he was in front of the movie all the way through to its opening in American theaters. Is there anything you can talk about regarding his work with King Kong and why he even chose it?
Well, it's certainly King Kong is the first American film that he made that could be described as a blockbuster. He'd done two or three before that. He'd upped sticks from Italy, moved to the United States, and was making a name. But King Kong was really his statement film. I think he had done, apart from the ones we've mentioned, he made Waterloo in 1970. That was a very big film made in conjunction with the Soviet Union, Mosfilm. But it's King Kong, yes, that everybody sort of associates with Dino, and you're absolutely right. He was hands-on in every respect. He was out front promoting it in interviews on television, press conferences, and so on. He was engaged with every single decision about, what the ape should be like, how big it should be. He made the decisions that it should be set in a contemporary period, not back in the 1930s like the original. That it should be the World Trade Center, not the Empire State Building. All of these sort of things he was engaged with, and I think the filming of it, the making of that film, was almost a spectacle in itself. It was part of the promotion, the casting of Jessica Lange in the role, of the girl that had been Fay Wrays in the earlier version. And of course, there was a whole legal action going on through all of this because Universal was planning to do its own version of King Kong. So there was this controversy rumbling along in the background throughout. Now, why did he choose to make King Kong? Well, I think this comes back to Dino's strong movie memory, that he was somebody who grew up in the 1930s and an Italian who went to the cinema in the 1930s, saw a lot of American movies, read a lot of comics, and King Kong or Flash Gordon, these sort of movie experiences, these spectacular sort of entertainment features of American culture stuck in his mind. And he thought, everybody knows King Kong. It's repeated on TV all the time. Why not do a remake? We've got far better technological means today than existed in the 1930s when I think it even caught people by surprise how successful it was in the 30s. But in the 70s, there was the expectation that it would be, a real sort of eye-popping experience, remaking this thing with a 40-foot, ape and so on, mechanical hands and everything, a massive investment of resources in this film. And he employed his director, John Gilliman, a British director who had made The Towering Inferno not long before, as well as, a lot of smaller budget British films going back, to the 40s and 50s.
I thought it was pretty courageous of him, brave of him, to tackle such an iconic movie in film history. And I thought it was pretty amazing. So.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous because, of course, when you do something like this, expectations are high. And, of course, particularly with Dino, although he'd made Serpico and 3 Days of Condor, Death Wish, he'd made films that had been successful in the United States before. I think people were also, in a way, expecting him to fall, to fail with a project like this, because it was on such a large scale that it was a great risk. I mean, Dino was a risk taker, and this was probably one of his biggest risks, which came off. I mean, the film was well received. It launched a number of careers, but there's no guarantee that the remake will do well. And in fact, there is a sequel, of course, to King Kong, which is King Kong Lives, made in 1986, which didn't do anything like as well.
Can you think of any other of Dino's blockbusters that did as well as King Kong?
No, I think really that's the one. I mean, if we can look back, I mean, War and Peace did very well. Waterloo did okay, I think, if one puts in the balance all the different factors, although it wasn't quite the box office hits that Dino certainly hoped. But there are some of his films which didn't quite come off. I think Ragtime, for example, which was an adaptation of the El Doctoro novel bestseller, didn't do. It got 8 Oscar nominations. And in fact, this is a characteristic actually of Dino's blockbusters, is they often get Oscar nominations for cinematography, for set design, for costume design, these sort of things. The quality of the, let's say, the architecture of the film is high, but sometimes things don't quite work, and often I suspect that has something to do with the length, because you can't have a short blockbuster. So if you look at the length of these films, and I don't think DINO'S are particularly exceptional, but if you look at the length, the Bible is 174 minutes. Waterloo was 134 minutes, exactly the same length as King Kong, which was 134 minutes. Ragtime was 155 minutes. These are very long films, and to hold an audience for that length of time is a real challenge. I think Dune is the film which is actually being made again. I think there's a version of Dune due for release next year. But this is 1984, David Lynch directing. It's 136 minutes, and people found it a bit slow. It didn't quite sort of take off. It's a film that I think is recognized as having many qualities, but didn't quite achieve that box office effect of the aerial bombardment that was hoped for. So it's a challenge. There's no guarantee, even if you create an event around a film, there's no guarantee that it will actually achieve the result that's desired.
I was reading about the success of Jaws and how it was a marketing marvel almost before it was a film. They had this whole marketing plan. They wanted to put a ton of money into the marketing. Do you think Dino picked up on that for King Kong, or do you think that was something in his back pocket all along, that he was going to sell it before he made it?
I think Jaws was undoubtedly an influence. I mean, Dino, of course, did make his own Jaws after King Kong, which is this film, which I did okay, I think, but it definitely sort of came after Jaws. Every great film that is a success leads to sort of copycat films, and Jaws, of course, was one of those. I mean, I think if you think back now, I mean, I saw Jaws again, a couple of months ago, and you have to think, well, what's striking about it? Well, of course, one thing that really sort of sticks in your mind and immediately struck me on seeing it again is the music. It's absolutely, without that music of the threat of the shark is coming, creating this atmosphere of tension and expectation, you have to wonder, well, would it have been such a success? I mean, it was a beautifully simple idea in a way, that just had a huge impact. And I think, Dino is somebody who went to the movies a lot. He was always sort of reading, looking out for ideas, and the success of this film led him to think, well, what could I do? And he quite often compared in interviews, the shark of Jaws and the ape of King Kong. And he thought the ape was much more appealing because it had a heart. The ape was a character, with almost a sort of a sort of human quality that people could sympathize with. The ape of King Kong makes people cry. He would say, nobody cries about the shark. The shark has no personality, nothing, but the ape does. And so he was convinced he was onto something that would be better than Jaws.
Do you think that there are any other pieces of the formula that create a successful blockbuster?
Well, I mean, the success depends on a number of things, not just the qualities of the film itself. Of course, it depends on the moment it comes out, and blockbusters are typically either films for the summer or for the Christmas holiday period. So it depends what else is out there at that sort of time. And in a way, I think certainly if a blockbuster is going to succeed, it helps if there are really spectacular special effects of some sort. This is why disaster movies often, you see the director of King Kong coming from Towering Inferno. They have this capacity to be compelling visually. I mean, I think that's it ultimately. A blockbuster, the dialogue doesn't count for very much. There's got to be a story, but the dialogue counts for far less than the visuals. There's got to be a visual impact. I mean, this is interesting. If you look at DINO'S blockbusters going back to, that precursor, Ulysses, 1954. I mean, it's in colour. They're all in colour at a time, when most Italian films were not in colour. In fact,
Okay.
Even in 1960, most Italian films were still in black and white. So already colour was a, spectacular element, as with Gone with the Wind and so on. So it's important to have those sort of aesthetic and visual qualities, which may take the form of special effects, right in the foreground. It helps if you've got a story that in some way people know or know of. I think if you're starting from scratch, and not many blockbusters do start from scratch, if they're not taking a classic piece of literature, then they're taking a best-selling novel usually, or inspired by some real event. We can think of lots of examples. I mean, the Star Wars films, of course, were, probably still are blockbusters. In a way, the Marvel films present themselves as blockbusters too. I mean, they're like these aerial bombs that land on the market and destroy everything around them. But I think these days there's probably a lot more strategic planning goes into ensuring that films like this succeed. They can still bomb, they can still fail, but we seem to have lost something of that sort of hit and miss element that is quite marked if one looks at sort of Dino's list of blockbusters.
So, final question. Out of all of the blockbusters Dino has produced, which one do you think was the most successful, considering all of the elements of cinema and filmmaking?
Well, I think if we, there are a number of ways of evaluating success, aren't there? And I think we worked out that altogether there are about 10 blockbusters, if we include films like Taipan, which, is probably not particularly well remembered today. I think probably King Kong is the one that stands out in terms of staying in people's memory. I mean, I think people know it, I would say, better than the original today. If they think King Kong, they think of Dino's King Kong rather than the Universal film from the early 30s. I think Waterloo was a film. I remember seeing Waterloo as a schoolboy and being, absolutely fascinated by it. I mean, I had a heavy marketing campaign. It had, a great cast. Rod Steiger in the part of Napoleon. In terms of the aesthetic qualities, which is the highest quality, then I think, one has to put back into consideration films like Ragtime and Dune, I have to say, which, although they were not successful at the box office, have, great qualities, great directors, great effects, and it's really pace. Pace is the problem. I think the challenge with blockbusters is the length. The length, it's a challenge to hold the attention. But I would have to say, ultimately, we do come back to King Kong. Dino's King Kong is his blockbuster, and the one film that probably people, internationally, at least in Italy, it may be a bit different, but internationally, I think the one film that people remember him for, apart from perhaps the Hannibal series, which, is a whole other thing. They're not blockbusters. They're a different sort of film.
Well, that's great. I feel like going out and watching it again. So
yeah, me too.